In the humid spring of 1780, Charleston, South Carolina, the jewel of the American South, stood at the precipice of catastrophe. Its elegant Georgian mansions, bustling wharves laden with indigo and rice, and genteel society massed a powder keg of revolutionary fervor, enslaved resistance, and imperial ambition. For 4 brutal years, from 1778 to 1782, Charleston would transform from a prosperous colonial port into a blood-soaked battlefield where 3 parallel revolutions collided. Patriots fighting for independence from Britain, enslaved Africans seizing the chaos to claim their own freedom, and Loyalists struggling to preserve the old order. What emerged was not one revolt, but a symphony of uprisings, a cascading series of rebellions within rebellions that would reshape the fate of the American South and expose the profound contradictions at the heart of the revolution itself. Welcome to Historic Crimes TV, where you get the true story of events that have happened in the past which helped shape the history of the world that we are living in. Before we begin, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. By 1778, Charleston had become the 4th largest city in British North America and the wealthiest per capita. Its deep harbor made it indispensable for trade, but more critically, it was the gateway to the resource-rich southern colonies. Britain's southern strategy, conceived after setbacks in the north, identified Charleston as the linchpin. Capture it, and the entire South would supposedly fall like dominoes back into royal control. But Charleston was also uniquely volatile. Its population of approximately 12,000 included some 8,000 enslaved Africans, a black majority that terrified the white planter elite. These enslaved people had long memories. The Stono Rebellion of 1739 still haunted the collective consciousness. Now, with war fracturing the social order, whispers of freedom spread through the slave quarters like wildfire. In the summer of 1779, as British forces moved closer, Charleston authorities uncovered what they believed was a massive slave conspiracy. Enslaved people, recognizing that British military operations might provide an opportunity for liberation, allegedly planned a coordinated uprising to coincide with a British attack. The plot, real or exaggerated by paranoid authorities, involved plans to set fires throughout the city, seize weapons, and fight their way to British lines. Lord Dunmore's proclamation of 1775, which had promised freedom to enslaved people who joined the British cause, had not been forgotten. Authorities responded with savage repression. Over the course of several weeks, dozens of enslaved people were arrested. Show trials resulted in public hangings on Charleston's wharfs, gruesome spectacles designed to terrorize the enslaved population into submission. Yet the executions only proved how precarious the Patriots' position truly was. They were fighting for liberty while denying it to the majority of Charleston's population. On February 11, 1780, a massive British armada appeared off Charleston's coast. General Sir Henry Clinton commanded approximately 14,000 troops, the largest expeditionary force Britain had yet assembled in North America. His siege would become the largest battle of the entire Revolutionary War by number of participants. Major General Benjamin Lincoln commanded Charleston's defense with only 5,500 Continental and militia troops. From the beginning, the mathematics of survival looked grim. Clinton's strategy was methodical and ruthless. His forces landed south of the city and began a classical siege, digging parallel trenches that crept inexorably closer to Charleston's fortifications. British ships ran past Fort Moultrie and sealed off the harbor. By late March, Charleston was completely encircled, cut off from reinforcement or escape. Inside the city, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Food supplies dwindled. British artillery pounded the city day and night, reducing elegant homes to rubble. Civilians, both men, women, and children huddled in cellars as hot shot, heated cannonballs designed to start fires rained down on the wooden city. The enslaved population watched and waited. Some saw the British as liberators. Others viewed them simply as a different set of masters. Small groups began slipping through the lines to British camps, where commanders desperate for labor and intelligence welcomed them despite the contradictions of Britain's own involvement in the slave trade. On May 12, 1780, after a siege of nearly 2 months, Lincoln surrendered. It was the worst American defeat of the war. Over 5,000 Continental soldiers became prisoners of war. The British also captured 4 ships, vast stores of ammunition, and the symbolic heart of Southern resistance. Clinton's triumph seemed complete, but his victory contained the seeds of a far more complex revolt than he anticipated. The British occupation transformed Charleston into a garrison city. Clinton left Lord Cornwallis in command of the South with instructions to pacify the region. Charleston became the administrative capital of British operations, hosting thousands of redcoats, German Hessian mercenaries, and Loyalist militia. The occupiers immediately demanded loyalty oaths from Charleston's population. Those who refused faced property confiscation, imprisonment, or exile. The city's patriots faced an agonizing choice: swear false allegiance or lose everything. But beneath the surface of apparent submission, a covert resistance network took shape. Led by figures like Christopher Gadsden, imprisoned for refusing the oath, and functioning through coded messages, secret meetings in taverns, and networks of trusted merchants, Charleston's patriots began gathering intelligence and preparing for liberation. Women played crucial roles in this underground resistance. Patriot wives visited imprisoned husbands, smuggling messages and supplies. Rebecca Mott, Jane Thomas, and others risked execution to maintain communication networks. Their homes became safe houses and message drops. For Charleston's enslaved population, British occupation offered unprecedented opportunities and profound dangers. Britain's Philipsburg Proclamation, 1779, had promised freedom to any enslaved person who escaped to British lines. Thousands did exactly that. By late 1780, Charleston harbored a fluid population of escaped slaves who had claimed British protection. They worked as laborers, guides, spies, and even soldiers in specialized units. The British established a refugee camp on the outskirts where formerly enslaved people created a parallel society, neither slave nor fully free, but autonomous in ways unimaginable just years before. This city within a city became a beacon. Enslaved people from plantations across South Carolina risked everything to reach Charleston. Some walked for days through hostile territory. Others commandeered boats and sailed downriver. Their exodus drained labor from Patriot and Loyalist plantations alike, creating economic chaos. But this liberation was conditional and precarious. The British remained committed to slavery as an institution. They simply weaponized it against the Patriots. Escaped slaves faced brutal conditions, meager rations, and the constant threat that British promises meant nothing. When smallpox and camp fever swept through refugee camps in 1781, thousands died, a cruel irony for those who had sought freedom. Outside Charleston's immediate orbit, partisan warfare convulsed the South Carolina countryside. Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, Thomas Sumter, the Gamecock, and Andrew Pickens led guerrilla bands in a vicious campaign against British supply lines and Loyalist militias. This guerrilla war bled into Charleston itself. Partisan raids came within miles of the city. British foraging parties ventured out at their peril. Supply convoys required massive escorts. The countryside that was supposed to support the occupation instead became hostile territory. After Cornwallis's surrender at Yorktown in October 1781, British control of the South began to crumble. Charleston remained under occupation, but it was now an isolated garrison in hostile territory. The remaining British commander, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Leslie, later succeeded by General Alexander Leslie, faced deteriorating conditions. Through 1781 and into 1782, Charleston witnessed desperate escape attempts by both imprisoned patriots and confined slaves. The most dramatic occurred in early 1782 when a group of Patriot prisoners attempted to seize a British ship in harbor. The plot was betrayed, and the ringleaders were executed, their bodies displayed as warnings. Meanwhile, enslaved people who had sought British protection now faced a terrifying reality. The war was ending, and Britain was preparing to evacuate. What happened to those who had been promised freedom? As peace negotiations progressed in Paris, Charleston's formerly enslaved community erupted in resistance against potential re-enslavement. Some British officers, to their credit, insisted on honoring promises of freedom. General Leslie began compiling the Book of Negroes, a register of black loyalists to be evacuated to British territories. But the logistics were nightmarish, and American authorities demanded the return of stolen property. Enslaved people who had risked everything now faced being handed back to their former masters. Small-scale revolts broke out in British camps. Some refugees attempted to seize ships. Others fled into the swamps, choosing uncertain freedom over certain bondage. Between April and December 1782, the British evacuated Charleston in waves. Approximately 5,000 formerly enslaved people departed with them, bound for Nova Scotia, Jamaica, England, and ultimately, for some, Sierra Leone in Africa. They were among the few tangible beneficiaries of the Revolution's chaos. But an estimated 3,000 to 4,000 others who had sought British protection were left behind, abandoned to their former master's vengeance. The betrayal was complete. On December 14, 1782, Governor John Matthews and General Nathanael Greene led Continental forces into Charleston. The British were finally gone. Church bells rang. Patriots celebrated in the streets. But liberation brought its own terrors. Patriot authorities immediately began settling scores. Loyalists faced confiscation of their property, exile, and in some cases, execution. The city's economy, shattered by years of war, collapsed further as Loyalist merchants fled. For the enslaved population who remained, the Patriot victory meant crushing disappointment. The Revolution's promises of liberty did not extend to them. If anything, authorities clamped down harder, paranoid about the revolutionary ideas that enslaved people had absorbed during the occupation. The Charleston wartime revolts were not a single event, but a cascading series of upheavals that exposed the American Revolution's deepest fault lines. In the space of 4 years, the city experienced siege, occupation, underground resistance, slave revolt, guerrilla warfare, evacuation, and liberation, only to emerge with the institution of slavery more entrenched than ever. Charleston's wartime experience was a preview of conflicts to come. The contradictions between revolutionary ideals and social reality, between proclaimed liberty and actual bondage, would fester for another 8 decades before exploding in the Civil War, a war Charleston would also experience through siege and revolt. For the thousands of formerly enslaved people who boarded British ships in 1782, heading for uncertain futures in Nova Scotia or Sierra Leone, the Revolution had meant something profoundly different than it did for the white patriots who reclaimed Charleston. They had revolted not against distant tyranny, but against the tyranny in their own homes, streets, and lives. Their revolt was the most radical of all and the most thoroughly suppressed. But it could never be entirely forgotten. The memory of those years when thousands of enslaved people claimed freedom amid the chaos of war would inspire future generations. The Charleston wartime revolts were not the end of the struggle for black freedom, but a crucial chapter in a longer revolution, one that continues to this day. In the end, Charleston's story reminds us that revolutions are never simple, never clean, and never benefit everyone equally. The question of whose liberty mattered and whose did not was answered on Charleston's blood-soaked streets between 1778 and 1782. It was an answer that would haunt America for centuries to come.